Ladies and gentlemen, friends of consciousness, today we embark upon a journey not through the streets of wealth or poverty, but through the corridors of the mind. For it is in the mind where fortune is born, where lack begins, and where the invisible forces of life respond to the vibrations we emit. There is no greater truth than this. Your words, your thoughts, your beliefs, and the faith you carry are the architects of your material and spiritual condition. The first thing to understand is that the rich and the poor are not defined merely by numbers in a bank account, but by the inner conditions that attract or repel abundance. Consider the mind of the one who struggles. Fear, doubt, worry, and complaint dominate. The poor-minded person often says, "I can't afford this," or "there's never enough," not realizing that such words are commands sent out into the unseen, calling back more scarcity. Scarcity is not a law of life, it is a law of thought. The universe responds to the invisible pattern we draw with our beliefs. On the other hand, the mind that attracts prosperity and opportunity speaks in terms of faith, gratitude, and expectation. The rich-minded individual does not merely hope for abundance, they assume it. They recognize that the supply of life is infinite and that the channels of prosperity are ever open to those who align with higher laws. When the thought is right, when the word is harmonious, when the attitude is one of trust and courage, doors open that were invisible before. It is also necessary to understand that life does not work on partial truths or wishful thinking. You cannot say, "I want wealth," while secretly harboring fear of failure or clinging to resentments. These inner contradictions are like knots in the fabric of your destiny. The law of life responds only to clear, unwavering patterns. Speak your word with confidence. Think your thoughts with joy. Believe in the invisible currents of abundance, and they will take form in the visible world. Many believe that money and prosperity are secured through struggle and toil alone, but struggle is the sign of misaligned thought. Life does not reward hardness. It responds to harmony. Align your inner convictions with the principle of divine abundance. Let go of anxiety over money and instead affirm, "I am in the right place, doing the right thing, at the right time. The supply of the universe flows to me freely and abundantly." When you live in this consciousness, you invite opportunities, ideas, and resources that previously seemed impossible. Another critical distinction between the mind of the poor and the mind of the rich is the attitude toward giving. The poor-minded person clutches, the rich-minded person gives. Giving is not loss, it is the seed of increase. When you release with faith, when you share your blessings in the spirit of love, the universe returns manifold. A closed fist may protect you temporarily, but it also blocks the river of life. An open hand receives and multiplies. It is essential to note that no amount of external advice or strategies can replace the internal shift in consciousness. One may study the principles of finance, may read countless books, may follow every trend, but without a transformed mindset, these efforts often meet with frustration. Change begins inwardly, with the realization that life is a mirror reflecting your inner beliefs. Do not try to change the world first, change your perception, and the world will adjust accordingly. Fear is the greatest poverty bringer. Fear of lack, fear of loss, fear of failure, these are invisible blocks that attract limitation. Yet, when faith replaces fear, when courage takes the place of doubt, the universe responds with a flow that seems miraculous, but is perfectly natural. Faith is not passive, it is active, knowing, and commanding. When you declare, "I am prosperous, I am guided, I am successful," you are setting a law in motion that brings forth results. Finally, remember that every experience, whether seeming success or failure, is a teacher. The poor-minded mind sees setbacks as punishment. The rich-minded mind sees lessons, adjustment, and realignment. Life does not work against you. It works through you, responding to the vibrations you send. Adjust your thoughts, refine your words, guard your mind against fear and complaint, and you will witness the transformation of your circumstances. Thus, the difference between the rich and the poor is not in the external, but in the inner. Align with the laws of thought, word, and expectation. Believe in abundance as your rightful inheritance. Speak and act from faith, not fear. Give generously, think positively, and trust the invisible forces that respond to your inner patterns. Then watch as life unfolds in ways that are beyond what the limited mind could ever imagine. The mind is the true source of wealth. It is within the unseen chambers of consciousness that the seeds of prosperity are sown, nurtured, and brought to fruition. Many wander through life believing that wealth is external, something to be pursued in the world outside. But in truth, the external world is only a mirror reflecting the inner condition of the mind. Thoughts, words, and beliefs act like invisible architects, shaping the landscape of our experiences. When one truly understands this principle, it becomes evident that the first and most crucial step toward abundance is the mastery of one's own mind. Every thought that is entertained carries a vibration, an energy, and a pattern that attracts corresponding circumstances. A thought of lack, of limitation, or of unworthiness will inevitably draw back experiences that echo that vibration. Conversely, a thought of plenty, of opportunity, and of worthiness establishes a pattern in the unseen world that life must respond to. This is a law as immutable as the law of gravity, yet unlike physical laws, it is often overlooked because it operates beyond the senses, in realms that the untrained eye cannot see. The richness of life is therefore a reflection of the richness of thought. A mind steeped in fear and anxiety cannot command fortune, for it is sending out signals that repel the very things it desires. Consider the person who constantly worries about money, repeats over and over, "I never have enough," or focuses on what is missing. Every repetition of such a thought is like casting a net that draws scarcity closer and closer. Life does not recognize complaint. It responds only to the pattern set by the inner consciousness. Words are not mere expressions, they are decrees. When spoken repeatedly, they create a reality. Thus, one cannot separate thought from word from manifestation. They are a trinity that governs every circumstance. To cultivate a mind that attracts wealth, it is necessary to observe thoughts as a careful gardener observes the soil. Thoughts that are limiting or negative must be plucked out, for if allowed to grow, they will choke the life from the seeds of abundance. Positive, constructive thoughts must be nurtured and repeated until they become habitual. The mind must be disciplined, for unbridled thought is like a river without banks. It overflows in every direction, sometimes destroying what could have been a fruitful harvest. But a mind that is directed, that understands the laws of life, channels its energy in ways that bring growth and prosperity. One of the most powerful tools in this process is the practice of affirmations. When the mind repeatedly declares, "I am prosperous, I am successful, I am guided to opportunity," it establishes a vibrational pattern in the unseen, a blueprint that life conforms to. Faith is the magnet that draws circumstances into alignment with these declarations. It is not enough to wish or hope, one must assume, expect, and believe with unshakable certainty. The universe responds to the certainty of thought, not to the wavering of doubt. Another key element in understanding the mind as the source of wealth is the recognition that imagination is the workshop of the soul. What the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Visualization is not mere daydreaming. It is the method by which the inner consciousness impresses the blueprint upon the invisible forces of life. By imagining oneself already in possession of wealth, already living the life desired, one sends a clear signal to the universe. The unseen forces work to bring the invisible picture into the visible world. A mind constantly rehearsing lack or limitation, however, never creates a blueprint of prosperity. It remains in the workshop of fear, producing patterns of deficiency. Attention, therefore, must be carefully guarded. Every day, the mind should be engaged in creative thinking, constructive imagination, and the repetition of positive, empowering words. This is the true labor that produces fortune, not endless struggle, not frantic effort, not grasping for opportunities in desperation. Effort without alignment is fruitless. Alignment of the mind with the principles of abundance produces effortless results. Many fail to realize that they are in partnership with a greater intelligence, a universal law that responds to mental patterns. When the mind is aligned with this law, circumstances that seemed impossible are drawn as naturally as water flows downhill. The law of life is impartial and operates according to the vibrational frequency of thought. Riches are not merely monetary, they are a state of consciousness that manifests in all areas of life, relationships, health, opportunities, and joy. By cultivating a mind that is rich in thought, one lays the foundation for all forms of abundance. Furthermore, it is essential to understand that wealth, in its truest sense, is not hoarded but is circulated. The mind that is aware of its power recognizes that giving is part of the law of increase. When one thinks abundantly and gives freely, one is affirming faith in the infinite supply of life. This act of generosity is not depletion but reinforcement of the mental pattern of prosperity. Clutching, grasping, or hoarding arises from a poor-minded consciousness and inevitably attracts lack because the inner attitude contradicts the outer desire. The rich mind, however, gives with joy and confidence, knowing that the law responds to abundance. Every opportunity to give is a declaration that one trusts life to replenish, and life does so in mysterious and sometimes unexpected ways. It is also vital to remember that thoughts are contagious. The company one keeps, the conversation one participates in, and the literature one consumes all affect the mind's vibration. Poor-minded conversations, filled with complaint and fear, lower the consciousness and attract corresponding circumstances. Rich-minded thoughts, filled with optimism, gratitude, and faith, raise the vibration and attract circumstances of growth and opportunity. Therefore, the mind must be vigilant, conscious, and selective. Awareness of the invisible influences is as necessary as awareness of the physical world. Discipline of thought is not restriction, it is liberation, for it opens the channels through which the currents of life can flow unimpeded. A rich mind sees opportunities where others see obstacles, solutions where others see problems, and blessings where others see misfortune. This is because the mind that is attuned to abundance recognizes that life is not against it but for it, that every experience can be used constructively, and that the invisible currents respond to the clarity and faith of thought. The cultivation of such a mind requires patience, persistence, and practice. One cannot expect instant perfection, but with consistent effort, the thought patterns of poverty can be replaced with the thought patterns of prosperity. Every thought, word, and belief is a brushstroke on the canvas of life. Paint with intention, clarity, and confidence, and the picture of abundance will emerge. It is not the material conditions themselves that matter most, but the consciousness from which they flow. Therefore, begin each day by affirming abundance, imagining the life desired, and choosing thoughts that empower, uplift, and attract. Guard the mind as one would guard a treasure, for it is indeed the source from which all wealth springs. The law of life is responsive, but it is also exacting. It responds not to idle wishes or fleeting desires, but to sustained mental patterns that are maintained with faith and purpose. Thoughts of fear, worry, resentment, or limitation must be replaced with thoughts of confidence, joy, courage, and expectation. This is the true work of life, the shaping of the mind to attract, receive, and create. Once this is understood and practiced, circumstances will inevitably conform, opportunities will appear, and wealth, in its fullest sense, will manifest. The mind, therefore, is the great source, the original seedbed, and the creative force of all prosperity. Fear, doubt, and scarcity thinking are the greatest obstacles to abundance, for they establish inner patterns that attract limitation and prevent the natural flow of prosperity. Many go through life unaware that every worry, every hesitation, every inner complaint is like a magnetic charge pulling circumstances that echo those vibrations. The mind that dwells on fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of not having enough, unconsciously issues commands to the universe that manifest as obstacles, delays, and scarcity. Scarcity is not a law of life. It is a law of thought, and it cannot be overcome by effort alone. One may strive, labor, and exert every physical muscle, but unless the inner pattern of belief is corrected, the external results will remain inconsistent or insufficient. Doubt operates similarly. When a person hesitates, questions their worthiness, or doubts the possibility of their dreams, they are erecting barriers, invisible to the eye but powerful in their effect. The universe, which responds with mathematical precision to the inner state, cannot deliver what the mind secretly contradicts. If you say, "I want abundance," but your heart whispers, "It is impossible for me," you have nullified the request. The outer world is only a reflection of the inner state. On the contrary, faith, gratitude, and a mindset of giving open channels of life and invite opportunities that may have seemed unreachable. Faith is not blind hope. It is knowing with certainty that the supply of life is inexhaustible and that the unseen forces of the universe respond to clear patterns of belief. It is a mental attitude that expects good and trusts life to provide. Gratitude is a magnet that attracts more blessings because it focuses attention on what is already abundant rather than on what is lacking. When the mind is constantly aware of and thankful for the good already present, it sends out a signal of harmony and openness, which the universe naturally aligns with. Giving, too, is a demonstration of faith and abundance. The poor-minded person clutches, fearing that sharing what they have will lead to loss. Yet, giving is not subtraction. It is the affirmation of the infinite nature of life. When one gives with joy, one declares trust in the continuous supply of the universe, and this act opens the way for greater inflows. It is through giving that wealth becomes a circulating force rather than a stagnant possession. Those who fear to release, who hoard or hold grudges, attract limitations because their inner attitude contradicts their desire for abundance. The rich-minded individual, however, sees the universe as an endless reservoir, responds with generosity, and thereby aligns with its laws. Every thought, word, and action must be in harmony with these principles to truly transform one's circumstances. One cannot simultaneously harbor fear and claim abundance. Fear is an inner contract with limitation. Faith is an inner contract with freedom. When fear dominates, the mind sends out vibrations that attract obstacles, delays, and disappointment. Worry is a subtle form of fear, often disguised as conscientiousness or diligence, yet it produces the same effect. It holds the mind in bondage to limitation. Recognizing the power of thought in shaping reality is the first step toward liberation. Every fear-based thought must be observed, acknowledged, and then consciously replaced with a thought of trust, expectation, and courage. Doubt and uncertainty can be neutralized only by persistent affirmation and deliberate choice of thought. The practice of mental substitution is essential. Whenever the mind drifts toward lack or limitation, one must immediately replace the thought with one of abundance and possibility. This is the work of spiritual discipline. To guard the mind, to correct its errors, and to maintain alignment with the principles of prosperity. The rich-minded consciousness does not wait for external circumstances to change before feeling secure. It creates security by its inner state. It assumes abundance now, acts with confidence, and perceives opportunities rather than obstacles. In this state, life responds with the exact conditions necessary to fulfill the expectations set by the mind. Fear and doubt cannot coexist with this clarity of vision. They are weeds that choke the garden of prosperity if allowed to grow. The process of overcoming scarcity thinking requires awareness, persistence, and faith. One must continually remind oneself that the universe is not limited, that life is not against you, and that every challenge is temporary and constructive. The mind must be occupied with constructive, positive, and empowering thoughts. This does not mean ignoring practicalities, but it does mean placing the inner state above temporary appearances. When one maintains faith and gratitude, one finds that obstacles dissolve, opportunities present themselves, and circumstances arrange themselves in ways that seem miraculous, but are the natural response of the universe to a harmonious inner state. It is also important to recognize that scarcity thinking often arises from the habit of comparing oneself to others. The poor-minded consciousness measures its value by what others have and judges itself accordingly. This comparison breeds fear, envy, and insecurity, reinforcing the inner patterns of limitation. The rich-minded consciousness, however, measures itself by its own potential, trusts in the infinite supply of life, and focuses on its own path. Comparison gives way to confidence, envy gives way to inspiration, and insecurity gives way to faith. Every act of faith, every expression of gratitude, every conscious choice to give, amplifies the magnetic field of abundance and strengthens the inner pattern of wealth. Life is always responsive to these vibrations. The mind that is dominated by fear will attract experiences that mirror that fear, whereas the mind that is dominated by faith will attract experiences that mirror confidence and expectation. Fear, worry, and scarcity thinking are therefore self-fulfilling. To break free, one must recognize them as illusions, as patterns of thought that can be corrected through awareness, affirmation, and deliberate mental substitution. The practice of daily affirmations, visualization, and the conscious choice of positive words and thoughts is the path to transforming the inner state and, consequently, the outer circumstances. Every time one declares, "I am safe, I am provided for, I am guided," the mind reprograms itself, and the universe responds with corresponding conditions. It is essential to act from this inner state, not from anxiety or desperation. Action guided by fear rarely produces lasting results, whereas action guided by faith and confidence attracts support, resources, and opportunities. The mind that embraces these principles begins to see life in a new light. Obstacles are no longer threats but lessons. Challenges are invitations to grow, and circumstances are tools for the expression of the higher self. Fear diminishes, doubt disappears, and scarcity thinking is replaced by a confident expectancy. One begins to recognize that life is not a series of random events, but a harmonious orchestration responding to the patterns of thought that dominate consciousness. The mind, once trained to dwell in faith, gratitude, and generosity, becomes a powerful magnet for prosperity. Every encounter, every idea, every opportunity is filtered through this inner state and transformed into a stepping stone toward abundance. The principle is simple. Fear and scarcity thinking repel. Faith, gratitude, and giving attract. The universal laws do not negotiate with doubt. They respond to the clarity, the certainty, and the alignment of thought and feeling. To cultivate this rich-minded consciousness, one must be vigilant, persistent, and conscious in the selection of thoughts. The inner dialogue must be monitored, and negative patterns must be replaced with empowering beliefs. The words spoken must affirm abundance, the imagination must dwell on possibility, and the heart must maintain gratitude and trust. In doing so, the mind aligns with the invisible currents of life, and prosperity flows effortlessly. The rich-minded individual understands that life is abundant, that opportunities are everywhere, and that giving and gratitude are essential components of the law of increase. The poor-minded individual, on the other hand, remains trapped in fear, doubt, and scarcity, attracting circumstances that reflect the inner pattern of limitation. By understanding this fundamental difference, one can consciously choose the thoughts, words, and attitudes that create freedom, opportunity, and lasting abundance. Transformation begins inwardly. The outer world is merely a reflection of the inner consciousness. No amount of external effort, strategy, or manipulation can permanently alter circumstances if the mind remains untrained and misaligned with the principles of life. The world is a mirror, responding with perfect precision to the attitudes, beliefs, and expectations held within. To change your life, to attract prosperity, health, joy, or love, you must first change the inner patterns of thought. This is the first law of success. Consciousness creates reality. Every thought, feeling, and word you express sets into motion invisible forces that gather experiences corresponding to that vibration. Transformation is not superficial. It is not a matter of acquiring more knowledge or memorizing formulas. It is a deep, internal adjustment of perception, an awakening to the law that life is ordered and responds to the quality of your consciousness. When you understand that your inner state determines your outer conditions, you begin to observe your thoughts with care. You notice the habits of mind that perpetuate limitation and the ones that create abundance. The inner work requires vigilance. For thoughts that are allowed to run unchecked form patterns that become invisible chains, holding you to circumstances you would rather not experience. Awareness is the first step, but awareness alone is not enough. Once you recognize a limiting pattern, fear, doubt, resentment, impatience, you must consciously replace it with a constructive, empowering thought. The mind must be retrained, as a gardener trains the soil, removing weeds and planting seeds that will yield a bountiful harvest. Transformation inwardly also requires faith in the invisible, a willingness to trust in the unseen currents of life. Often, people attempt change based solely on what they can see or measure, but the law of life is spiritual before it is material. It responds to the unseen patterns of thought and feeling before manifesting in the physical realm. Faith is the bridge between the invisible and the visible. When one thinks with certainty, feels with conviction, and speaks with assurance, the universe aligns to bring those inner patterns into form. Patience is essential in this process. Transformation cannot be rushed or forced. The mind, like the soil, requires preparation and consistent cultivation. Impatience, anxiety, and worry are forms of interference that disrupt the natural flow of life. By maintaining a steady focus on constructive thoughts, by practicing daily affirmations and visualization, one establishes a strong inner pattern that the universe must respond to. The practice of self-discipline is central to inward transformation. This does not mean denial or suppression, but rather conscious selection of thoughts, words, and beliefs that serve your highest good. The mind is not a passive observer. It is an active participant in creation. Every repeated thought is a command to the invisible forces of life. When you maintain inner harmony, when your beliefs, words, and emotions are aligned, you create a magnetic field that draws the circumstances, people, and opportunities necessary for manifestation. Conversely, misalignment creates friction, resistance, and delay. One of the greatest tools for inward transformation is the use of affirmations, declarations of truth that impress the subconscious and establish new patterns of thought. By declaring, "I am worthy, I am prosperous, I am guided, I am in perfect alignment with divine supply," you reprogram the mind to expect and receive what is in harmony with these statements. Repetition, faith, and feeling are essential. The mind must be convinced internally before it can influence the external world. Another essential aspect of inward transformation is forgiveness, release, and detachment from the past. Clinging to old grievances, resentments, or failures is a mental pattern that obstructs the natural flow of life. The inner state cannot be fully aligned with abundance if it is burdened by bitterness or regret. Letting go is not passive. It is an active declaration of faith that life is abundant and that the past does not control the present or the future. Giving and generosity are further expressions of inward transformation. The consciousness that understands its power recognizes that holding is a limitation, and that sharing and contributing are expressions of alignment with the infinite supply of life. Giving with joy, without attachment to outcome, demonstrates faith in the unbroken flow of abundance and reinforces the mental patterns that attract more. The practice of gratitude is another pillar of inner change. Gratitude shifts attention from lack to plenty, from fear to trust, from limitation to possibility. It is a signal to the universe that you recognize and accept the abundance that surrounds you, and it opens channels for more blessings to flow in. Gratitude is not merely polite acknowledgement. It is a creative force that transforms consciousness and consequently transforms circumstances. Vision and imagination are also essential. The mind must not only release limiting thoughts, but it must actively construct a picture of the desired life. Visualization is not daydreaming. It is the method by which the subconscious mind receives clear direction. The more vivid, detailed, and consistent the inner picture, the more powerfully the law responds. The inner state must see the outcome as already accomplished, living in the consciousness of achievement before it manifests externally. Courage is required in this process. Transformation is often resisted by the familiar patterns of thought and behavior, by the habits that have long shaped experience. To move beyond these, one must act with confidence, trust, and persistence. Every step taken from the aligned inner state strengthens the pattern and brings it closer to manifestation. Consistency is crucial. One moment of faith followed by hours of worry and doubt will weaken the pattern. Transformation requires persistence, daily attention, and unwavering belief in the principles at work. The mind, once fully aligned with truth, prosperity, and expectation, becomes a powerful instrument of creation. Every action, decision, and interaction flows from this inner state and produces results that are harmonious and abundant. External circumstances begin to change as naturally as the seasons change, responding to the invisible currents established within. The inner work also includes a recognition that all challenges and apparent setbacks are opportunities for growth and refinement. The transformed mind does not see obstacles as defeat, but as lessons to adjust, refine, and elevate consciousness. This perspective prevents discouragement and maintains the flow of abundance, for the universe responds to confidence, clarity, and faith rather than to fear and complaint. Awareness of the interconnectedness of life is another aspect of inward transformation. The mind aligned with universal principles recognizes that prosperity, health, joy, and relationships are not isolated, but part of a harmonious whole. By cultivating positive inner patterns, one not only transforms personal circumstances but also radiates influence that uplifts others and creates a ripple effect of abundance. Inward transformation is therefore both a personal and universal process. It is personal because it changes the individual's relationship with life and with circumstances, and it is universal because it aligns the individual with the greater intelligence of life, allowing creative forces to operate unhindered. Discipline, awareness, faith, gratitude, forgiveness, generosity, courage, and vision are all tools to achieve this inner alignment. The practice of these principles daily, with sincerity and persistence, rewires the mind, shifts the consciousness, and creates a state in which abundance is the natural, inevitable result. The external world cannot resist a mind in full alignment with the law. Opportunities appear, people respond favorably, and the material conditions necessary to support the vision manifest without strain. The transformation inwardly is the secret that distinguishes those who live in harmony, success, and prosperity from those who struggle endlessly against circumstances, for it is not the external world that governs life, but the inner consciousness that shapes it. By committing to this inner work, by consistently choosing empowering thoughts, words, and beliefs, one sets in motion the invisible currents that orchestrate life in accordance with the highest good.